morning. Well, after that story, I really feel like it's a special morning. I really feel like the Spirit is here, wanting to speak to us. It's been a while since I've been up here, a little rusty, so pardon the rust. But I want to say a special hello to Adeline in the back because she's never seen me up here. She's probably thinking, "What is he doing?" Hi, sweetie. Well, the early chapters of Luke are very significant to me. And because there was a moment about 10 years ago, actually, this winter, when these early stories really came to life. And I had just come back from a missions conference, Urbana, and Luke was what it was all about. That was kind of the theme verse. And then we came back, and I was part of leading Bible studies, continuing with the Luke theme. And something really interesting happened. Every time we studied a passage, that following week, that passage would kind of come to life. It would seem to kind of, without anything that we did, sort of just kind of manifested, like that story kind of became true. And I can't go into all the details, but when we studied the story of Jesus calming the storm, that week, an incredible snowstorm hit Nova Scotia, and there was this like otherworldly calm that we felt. There is a story of the healing of the paralytic being lowered through the roof, and Jesus forgives him first and then heals him, and he's up on his way. And this one's a complicated one, but there were certainly issues of forgiveness of sin and sickness being healed all in my community all at the same time. There was a story of Jesus sending out the 12, to go to the different corners of the countryside. And that weekend, I was driving up to Malagash with some others for a retreat, and the car broke down on the way up. And we didn't know what to do, so I guess I think we got out of the car and knocked on the nearest house, and the person invited us in, and we had some really interesting sort of Jesus-type conversations with the people in that house on the way up to camp. And another week, we studied the sending of the 72. It's like the 12, but more. And it was stories like that led my friends and I to decide, at least in my Christian community, that next year we weren't all going to live in the same residence. We were all going to spread out and spread ourselves around campus. And so all these stories kind of came to life in really interesting ways. And what it felt like is that we were being invited into the story, that we were being called to participate somehow. And if you open up your Bibles to Luke 5, which you're welcome to do this morning, you'll kind of see where it all starts, where the call to participate really starts, at least for the disciples, and maybe for us too. Luke 5, 1-11. Jesus is teaching by the shore. We're not told what he's teaching about, but it's probably something about the kingdom of God. You get the sense that he's having a hard time projecting his voice. Maybe there's too many people. Luckily, there's some empty boats. And without asking the fisherman, he jumps into the boat. He says, "Hey, push me out a little bit." And suddenly he's able to teach the crowd. You can imagine the fishermen washing their nets nearby. They're maybe eavesdropping, listening a little bit to what's going on, perhaps curiously, perhaps apathetically. And when he's done, you can imagine maybe the crowd dissipating, but the fishermen remain. And he says to one fisherman named Simon, he gives him some unusual instructions. He says, "Put out the boat into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." So why are these unusual instructions? Well, my understanding is you don't normally fish during the day. At least it wasn't their practice. Usually you go fishing at night. And usually you go fishing in shallow water. So these two things seem to be contradicted by these instructions. And who is Jesus to give the professional fishermen this kind of advice? Well, it turns out he's not really giving them fishing instructions. He's asking for trust by giving them these unusual instructions. And you can sense that the fishermen, perhaps us too, are about to delve into something sort of mysterious. We're in over our heads when it comes to Jesus. And suddenly we're just asked to trust. Simon's objection is a reasonable one. This is verse 5. "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." He's already been working. Call this the graveyard shift. He's exhausted. He wants to go home. The last thing he wants to do is put those nets that he just cleaned back into the water and push the boat out. That's not a small thing to do. It takes a lot of effort to get ready to go out. You get the sense, perhaps, from this little sketch that Simon's life, at least in this moment, this week perhaps, it's hard. It's discouraging. And he feels maybe a little bit unproductive. Fishing is not a hobby. It's his livelihood. He didn't catch any fish. He's not making any money that week. But why does he say yes? Something about Jesus makes him want to say yes. Remembering this story in context reminds us that actually this is not the first time Simon has met Jesus. At some point prior to this, Jesus healed his mother-in-law. So Simon knows at least one thing about this guy. He can do that. Maybe that's enough to say, okay, I'll give this a shot. What follows next in verses 6 to 7? A dangerous abundance of fish. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats, so full they began to sink. I mean, this sounds kind of fun and exciting. Wow, what an incredible catch of fish. I mean, the money that you can make off this kind of haul that you're bringing in. Also incredibly terrifying. Their nets are going to break. Maybe those are their only nets. Maybe because they didn't sell fish that day, they have no money to buy more nets. Okay, the nets are one problem, but the boats are about to sink. I do not know how hard it is to bring up a boat from the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. But clearly, this is more than they can handle. This is unsettling and awe-inspiring. Yes, threatening, however, to their livelihood, threatening to their moment. What is going on? It seems great, but there's I would imagine, a lot of terror going, kind of rippling through the crowd at this point. Simon objects again. This time, it's a little more intense. He says, "Leave me alone. Leave me alone." When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. Go away." I have a hunch that this miracle was more than about just blessing them with a great day at sea, more than just giving them a lot of money in their pocket after they take it to the market. Simon senses something is going on. Jesus is actually the one who has cast his net today, and Simon feels that he's being pulled right into the boat. Simon would like to stay on the water. Just let me be a fisherman. Just let me stay here. Even though it's hard, even though I don't always catch the fish, I'm not ready for this. He can tell that Jesus is somehow bringing something really big, something huge, something deep into his life. And he just senses this guy's afraid. The fear takes him over. One of you ever felt like you have to drop to your knees and say, "Leave me alone. I'm a sinful person"? It's that level of intensity for him. Jesus, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not who you think. I can't handle this. Whatever it is, I'm not worthy. Simon focuses on himself. It's all about how he's not worthy. He focuses all about his inadequacy. And he does not focus on Jesus' adequacy. I mean, it was Jesus that just brought the fish. When Simon says, "I can't do this. I'm not good enough." It's often how our objections go when we feel Jesus kind of tugging at our heart. I can't speak well. I'm too young. I'm a nobody. And what does Jesus say? Well, he does not respond point by point to each one of Simon's objections. He doesn't say, "You know what, you can do this. You're not that bad, actually." What does he actually say? "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." That's in verse 10. Don't be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people. He doesn't say anything other than to say, "Don't be afraid," and to give him a new call. He doesn't say, "You're not that bad. You can handle this." He just says, this isn't the time to be afraid. Jesus, again, asking them to push out into deep water. He's calling for trust. And this is the turning point in Simon's life. This is the moment. These words will never leave him again. Probably in a way kind of haunt him for the rest of his life. becomes his life call. Jesus says, it's not about the fish, Simon. It's never about the fish. He gives him this call. It's a call that's both general in its scope and very specific. It's a general call because he calls Simon to participate in this story. It's something really that we're all called to do. That's why I say it's a general call. It's for every person. We're called to jump in. We're called to trust. It's a big story of God reconciling all people to himself, of restoring creation, of bringing shalom, of bringing the kingdom one life at a time. And when you break it down, what this call really looks like, it's about what? Fishing and people. It's about fishing because it's about bringing people in. It's about drawing close. It's about, the verb in the Hebrew means, it's Greek actually, it means to catch alive people, not to, kill and eat like you'd do with fish. It's about bringing in, not fish, but people. And in many ways, people are like the real object of our life. Maybe, like me, you've had moments of clarity when you realize that, it doesn't really matter how well I did in life. It doesn't really matter how impressive I was, how successful I was at this or that, but what matters is how we treated people. People are the real object of life. It makes you ask yourself, how am I doing in that regard? If I view my life really about how I treat other people. The most important commandment, Jesus says, love God, love people. Jesus invites us into the story, everyone. How do we join the story? How do we help make the world new? Relationships. It's all about people. Relationships of grace and mercy. And it's not just an idea that Jesus is throwing out there. This is how Jesus lived his life. This was the nature of his ministry. He treated people with kindness. Individual encounters. He slowed down, looked them in the eye. He's startlingly present, and he brings change simply through his presence and his love and his power. JB's message last week, it's all about the blind and the deaf being healed. Yes, incredible. But you can imagine it's not always with a snap of a finger. Sometimes Jesus brought change through a purposeful, relational moment. The person in that encounter is not just left with eyes that can now see or ears that can now work, but with a sense of being loved and being seen, given hope and a purpose. It's all about relationships, and Jesus calls them into that. And yet, this call is very, very specific. Why would Jesus articulate a call to join him using this kind of language? What's the point behind using this particular metaphor? It's all about fishing. Well, it's a rhetorical question. He uses fishing language because he's talking to fishermen. If he spoke to farmers, he would have used a different analogy. And it makes me wonder if there's something about the specifics of these fishermen's life that Jesus is trying to draw attention to. Not that there's anything special about them, per se, but that there's something about their life that he's calling out. He knows how they spend their day-to-day. He knows the structure and the thrust and the direction of their life. Every day, push out the boat, cast the nets, pull it in, see what you got, go back to shore, wash the nets, sell the fish, repeat again and again and again. And he says, you, fishermen, are being called to a new life. But, in a way, it's going to use all the same ingredients from your old life. He's going to take those specific things, he's going to redeem them. He's going to reorient them, give them a new direction. It's the same, but it's different. At the end of the day, they'll still be fishermen. Still be a little rough, a little salty. Fishermen, just following Jesus now. Now they're on a new boat. Now they've got new nets. Now they're on a different sea. I think this is what happens when Jesus calls us too. Very often he doesn't call us to a completely new kind of outward existence. I just wonder. He just says, who are you and what can you bring? What have you got? You have one piece of bread? You got a couple fish? well, watch what I can do with this. After he calls us, we're still us. We're just maybe living with a different purpose. In fact, we're even more ourselves than before. They're fishermen. They always remained a little rough, I'm sure. Always a little salty. But now they're energized in a new way, in a new direction. So it's like Jesus asks us, who are you? And what can you bring? I mean it. What are your skills? What are your passions? What are your opportunities? What have you already got around yourself, within yourself? And Jesus says, I can use that. How can we join Jesus in bringing God's kingdom, his shalom, through the world, into the world, through what we already have at our disposal? The ingredients of your very self and your very life. Yeah, it's a big call, and a very specific one too. And their response, it seems simple. In verse 11, they left everything and they followed him. I wish we could kind of get a sense of what they're really thinking in that moment, so you kind of have to tease it out. But notice, they follow a person. They're not following an idea. They haven't been presented with a new philosophy. It's not a new moral code that they've been considering. It's not even a religion. It was a guy, an actual human. A real person who felt love in his heart, who really knew pain. He walked and he talked and he touched. He had a good sense of humor, and I bet he knew how to, make a mean fish breakfast over a campfire. And following a person is a lot harder than following a system. It's more fluid, a little unpredictable. It's dynamic. Every day can be different. And the invitation for us is always to follow the person of Jesus. Nothing more, nothing less. Don't take your eyes off Jesus. Now, why did they really follow? Well, it's like why Peter decided to push out his boat in the first place. Something about this feels really compelling. He feels like he's being swept up in the whole thing. Maybe he has a sense, well, I guess my whole life has been leading up to this moment. You just kind of feel it. And I know that life is never going to be the same. Here I go. N.T. Wright has a beautiful quote, and it's about kind of imagining ourselves in the story. This is the kind of story it helps to get inside. Become Peter for a few moments. Pause and ponder what you normally do, day after day. And then imagine Jesus suddenly appearing, asking for your help with his own work. And then telling you to do something in your own line of work which seems pointless, a waste of time and effort. That's referring to pushing the boat out in the middle of the day. You do it, grumbling perhaps, under your breath, and suddenly everything clicks into place. What's going on? How did it happen? You feel a sense of awe, terror even, as you come to terms with the power of Jesus. Then feel that sense of terror increase as he turns to you with what looks like a question in his eyes, and it turns out to be a command. You and I are going to be working together from now on. And you realize you have no choice. If this man isn't worth following, nobody is. So what does it mean for you to follow? What does it mean for you to leave everything? I think it's different for every one of us, surely. But if I told you, you see that person at the back of the room? Go and follow them. Well, what would that mean to you? It meant if that person at the back of the room stood up and walked out of here, you would also stand up and walk out of here. And you'd try to follow closely in their footsteps, at least in the general pattern of their life, the kind of path that they're going to take. Well, how do we do that kind of following for someone who lived and died 2,000 years ago? Is he sitting in the room, standing up and walking out? Yes and no. Well, one way is to observe his teaching. And I don't mean this in a dry way. I mean, what are the kind of things Jesus told his followers to do? Well, it's all in the Sermon on the Mount. I'll refresh your mind briefly, because this is where it gets really practical and pretty radical. If you want to follow me, you be salt and light. You watch for the anger and the lust in your heart. You seek reconciliation with your brother and sister. You tell the truth, and you keep your promises. You give away what you have, and you go above and beyond, walking the extra mile. You love your enemies. You pray for the people that persecute you. You pray earnestly to the Father in humility and often in secrecy. You don't store up treasures on earth. You store them in heaven instead. You choose trust over anxiety. You choose not to judge. And you bear good fruit, building your house upon the rock. This is as practical as it gets from Jesus. This is what it means to follow. I don't want you to see them as rules, not even moral guidelines. Jesus is saying, if you really want to join the story, this is how you do it. This is how we participate in God bringing his kingdom, by treating people like this. And let me be clear. These are the ways we usher in or help God usher in his kingdom, because this is the way Jesus himself lived. He's not making this up. This is what he did. These are the ways people act when they've been transformed by Jesus' love and grace. These are the ways people act when we become more like him, like the image of God we are created to be. So observe his teachings. Of course, that's what it means to follow him. But also, realize he is in the room. He is in the room. Realize that the Christ still lives today. And the call is always the same. Push out your boat into the deep water. Cast your net. It's a deep, mysterious place, and it all comes down to trust. Now you imagine if Peter knew exactly what he was getting into and exactly how it was all going to pan out, would he have said yes? I doubt it. But he trusts that somehow this man is good and it's worth following. Our objections usually have to do with our inadequacy. I'm not worthy. And Jesus responds, but I am. I'm worthy. He's not calling them to be perfect people. He's not calling them to be the ideal leader, an awesome Christian. He just says, from now on, you will be fishing for people. Follow me. And if you hear that call and you think you can't do it, you're right. It's God that brings the fruit. Nothing we do in our own power is redemptive. God brings the transformation. He's the one that puts the fish in the net. You just have to pull them in. It's not I that lives, but it's Christ that lives in me. This is where we see that the call Jesus places on our life is not just a one-time thing. It's not just that moment that you decided to follow Jesus when you were 5, 10, 23 years old. As you hear this story, I don't just want you to reflect on your conversion moment. That's important. But I want you to notice the call Jesus places on you every day of your life. Push out the boat. Go into the deep water. God is continually inviting, continually redeeming the specifics of our life, reorienting, readjusting, repurposing the elements of our day-to-day, small and large. And when you're tempted to go back to your old ways, as we all do, and certainly the fishermen were tempted to go back to their old ways, fishing once again on the water after Jesus died, Jesus is right there on the shore again, calling you back. Let's do this again. It's a general call. It's a specific call. And for me, I feel this is a very personal call. As I was kind of preparing this story, I was really struck by that title, Fishing for People. And it is a call I feel on my own life, but it doesn't land as something very heavy. It's what God was saying to me with this passage is, Pelham, when you've been most in sync with me, when you've been acting the most like yourself, when you're paying attention to the Spirit the most, looking back all my life, that's when you've been living out this call. And I think the same is true for all of us. When we are most in sync with the Spirit, that's when we are fishing for people. And what God was showing me in that is all about loving people, caring for people, serving people, listening to people. It's not the easiest life, but it is the best one and the most fulfilling. And I can see this, that God looks at my life and he takes the specific inclinations, passions, skills, opportunities I have, and he slowly shapes them. He slowly conforms them to his will, and he says, now you're going this direction instead. He takes my fishing skills, our fishing skills, he says, you're going to be fishing for people. It's a journey of discovery for me, and I know God's going to continue to call for adjustments and reorientations as new opportunities arise, as skills go up and down, whatever, but the call remains the same. What does it mean for you to follow, I asked, and now I want to ask us all together. What does it mean for us to follow? And we're a church, we're a body, we're a community. We're all on our own journey. But it's not a journey we undertake alone. When Jesus sends out the disciples, as he's going to do, he sends them out in groups, usually in groups of 2 or 3. And whether you like it or not, the environment in which you live out your faith is in groups, maybe 2 or 3. This is your group. And just like Paul mentioned a couple weeks ago, baptism is more than just an individual thing, it's a corporate thing. Our faith is also lived out in that kind of corporate environment. We can't do it apart from each other. We do it together. We follow Jesus together. There's this vision that God has given the leadership of a direction that the church is to go in, and it's very simple. It's not complicated, but if Grace Chapel is going to follow Jesus corporately, then it means we're going to connect, grow, serve, and thrive. It's not complicated stuff. We simply believe that this is how we're going to live out the together part of our faith. It's through connecting together, growing together, serving together, and thriving together. We're not doing it alone. So when you think of the role that you play in this, and you play an important role, where do you fit? It's for you to figure out, you and God. But we suggest that you think about those 4 words. How are you going to connect, grow, serve, and thrive? I pray that you've felt the Spirit speak to your heart this morning. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.